I'd like to thank the Rector of the University for this invitation, which I've looked forward to for quite some time. And I'd also like to thank the Vice Rector and Mr. Brzezinskas for the warm welcome. I'm here today to talk to you about global economic trends and what it means for U.S. national security, a slight variation on the title that I think some of you were given. And I'm going to make two key points. One, that global trends indicate that wealth and power is moving to the emerging economies. We need to engage with them, we meaning the United States, but Europe needs to engage. The second major point is that U.S. economic engagement is a core part of our foreign policy and consists of much more than the promotion of commercial interests. Economic engagement is about inclusion, development, values, access to natural resources, and the protection of the environment, amongst other issues. I'm going to first begin by talking, and bear with me if I move away from the microphone, because I'm used to speaking walking out in audiences. But I want to review some global trends that we see unfolding in the next 15 to 20 years. Many of these are drawn from what is called the Global 2030 Report. It is about a year and a half old. It's an excellent piece of work, and I highly recommend it. It mentions that there are four major trends that are going to unfold in your lifetime of going out into the workforce. One, individual empowerment will accelerate substantially owing to poverty eradication, a huge growth in the middle class, I will underline that 3 times, greater educational attainment, and better health care. That's the first. And to expand a little bit, this growth in the middle class is what we call a tectonic shift, and I'm quoting from the report. For the first time, the majority of the world's population will not be impoverished. The middle class will be the most important social and economic sector in the vast majority of countries around the world. The second major element is that by 2030, Asia will have surpassed North America and Europe combined in terms of global power, based on GDP, population size, military spending, and technological investment. By 2030, Asia will well be on its way to returning to being the world's powerhouse, just as it was before 1500. The health of the global economy will increasingly be linked to the performance of the developing world, or the emerging economies, if you like to use that term, more than the West. In addition to China, India, Brazil, regional players such as Colombia, Indonesia, Nigeria, South Africa, and Turkey will become especially important to the global economy. Meanwhile, the economies of Europe, Japan, and Russia are likely to continue their slow relative declines. In Europe, Germany is likely to remain the leader of other EU countries in terms of overall economic growth. Russia by 2030 faces a steep population drop. It will lose about 10 million people, a greater decline than any other country during this period to 2030. In Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Nigeria have the potential to approach or surpass South Africa in overall national power. The key to their development will be better governance. In Southeast Asia, Vietnam's regional power will grow, approaching in 2030 that of Thailand. In Latin America, Brazil will continue to be the colossus of the South, increasing its position relative to Mexico and Colombia. So that's the second trend. The third trend is demographics. I mentioned what I mentioned about Russia. In the world of 2030, several trends will fundamentally shape, though not necessarily determine, most countries' economic and political conditions, as well as the relations among countries. These trends are: 1, aging. Both the West, but an increasing number of developing countries are facing aging populations. 2, migration. By that I don't mean migration due to conflict, but migration due to economic opportunity. 3, growing urbanization. And 4, an important one, what we call the food, water, energy nexus. The demand for food, water, and energy will grow by approximately 35, 40, and 50% respectively, owing to an increase in the global population and the consumption patterns of that expanding middle class which I mentioned. Climate change will worsen the outlook for the availability of these resources. I've laid out just briefly the trends as they are perceived for 2030. Now I want to turn to what it means for U.S. foreign policy. First, however, I need to emphasize that foreign policy is not just about national security threats. It's not just about defense. It's not just about fighting terrorism. It is also about economics. Economic shifts and changes have a major impact on the United States, as well as on our strategic relations. Emerging countries have put economic issues at the center of their foreign policy. That's a key element, at the center of their foreign policy. So we have placed it at the center of our foreign policy as well. But as I said in the beginning, foreign economic policy interests are not just about having a commercial agenda. It is more. It is about fighting poverty. It is about rules of the game, which I'll talk about later. It's about transparency. It's about freedom. And it's about economic opportunity for women. We have a national security strategy that clearly puts economic issues at the center of our agenda. The strategy calls for avoiding another global financial crisis as we recently witnessed. It also calls for making the G20 a key element of the future. It calls on more trade agreements, it calls on more investment and development, it calls on expanding markets, and it calls on supporting opportunity abroad. It also states that the U.S. aims to shape a new international system, one that more effectively represents the world of the 21st century to include these new emerging powers, but also makes them responsible for issues of global interest, including nuclear security, climate change, human rights, and others. This is why the United States works so hard to deepen its relationships with China, India, Russia, countries such as Brazil, South Africa, and Indonesia. Another element of our national security policy, it recognizes, and this is important for all of you, in today's world, non-state actors, not my government, not the government of Lithuania, but non-state actors have a huge role to play. Individuals, corporations, and civil society are playing a huge role in shaping the events of today and tomorrow. And our national security strategy recognizes that the global economy is being shaped by innovation, the emerging economies, as well as transitions to low-carbon energy. So what does this mean in practice for U.S. foreign policy? What does U.S. global economic engagement mean? And I'm going to go through several of them. Bear with me. U.S. economic engagement means we focus on prosperity. An open and global economy serves as a source of opportunity for the United States and a source of strength for the United States. As we see it, deepening linkages between markets and businesses provide a setting in which the energies and entrepreneurship of the U.S. private sector can flourish. Development also means, development that promotes good governance, unleashes the potential of different population, and creates new markets overseas is good for us and good for others. So therefore, under this element of prosperity, we have a very ambitious trade agenda. It includes the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, that is our agreement with the EU, the Trans-Pacific Partnership with 12 other of our closest allies. And again, I repeat, these agreements are not just about exports and trade. They will set global gold standards for openness and growth, as well as for labor, the environment, and transparency. They will advance the kind of open, rules-based public commons on which our nations thrive. TTIP and TPP represent a political and strategic bet that we are placing on each other and our shared future. TTIP, which affects Lithuania, will be for our economic health what NATO has been for our shared security for 65 years, a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Just as we focus on these agreements, we're also focusing, and I mentioned it earlier, the G20. It is, for us, the premier forum for international economic cooperation. The nations composing the G20 represent at least 80% of global gross national product. U.S. economic engagement also means that we focus on development. We have an interest in working to help the world's poorest countries grow into productive and prosperous economies. This will expand the circle of nations who are capable of reaping the benefits of a global economy while contributing, and this is important for us, for the United States, they will be contributing to global security as well as prosperity. This is why much of our development assistance focuses on areas such as fighting corruption, strengthening the rule of law, helping countries write new commercial codes, and promoting local business. U.S. economic engagement also means we focus on the promotion of values. We seek to promote values that we believe will improve common prosperity. They include what I call the rules of the game for economic interchange. Much of the work that is being done in the trade agenda is about setting standards. As we negotiate TTIP, our focus is on setting global regulatory, investment, and other standards for the world to emulate. Values also are supporting the rights of women and their participation in the economy. The increased entry and retention of women in the workplace will be a key driver of success for many countries. Supporting and promoting values is also about fighting corruption. We work within many organizations, the UN, the G20, the OECD, and other financial institutions, to promote the recognition that corruption is a violation of basic human rights and a severe impediment to development and security. We work with governments and civil society to bring greater transparency and accountability to government budgets, expenditures, and the assets of public officials. We also seek to institutionalize transparent practices in international aid flows, international banking and tax policy, and the management of natural resources to make it harder for officials to steal and to strengthen the efforts of citizens to hold their governments accountable. International engagement on values also means inclusion. There must be opportunities for civil society to thrive within nations and to forge connections among them. And there must be opportunities for individuals and the private sector to play a role in addressing common challenges. U.S. economic engagement also means that we focus on energy. For energy, and Lithuania knows this well, shapes politics, development, and governance within and between nations. We've undergone a tremendous change in the United States, which I'm sure many of you have read about. In 2005, 9 years ago, 60% of our oil was imported. Today, it is 40% and falling. Today, we are, and we never expected to be, the top natural gas producer in the world. Our natural gas production has grown by 1/3 since 2005, driven by the increase in shale gas. But global energy demand is also changing. Demand across Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America is surging. This year may well mark the first time in history that oil demand from developing economies, or emerging economies if you want to use that term, surpasses that of developed nations. China alone accounted for half the growth in global oil demand since 2000 and became the world's largest energy consumer in 2009. So we engage actively, and I will get into more detail as questions arrive, across the globe on energy issues. But I want to note that the engagement is not about production. It is also about ensuring access, it's about protecting the environment, and it's about helping countries, and I'll name a couple, Mozambique and Tanzania, to establish responsible, sustainable ways to develop and manage their newfound energy resources. Another element of economic engagement, I just mentioned values, but also I need to move to mention protecting the environment. In Copenhagen in 2009, President Obama and other leaders negotiated an agreement that for the first time included international emission reduction commitments. Under the agreement reached in Durban in 2011, the U.S. has been focusing on getting a new agreement, an international climate agreement, by 2015. And just last week, when the President met with President Hollande, they reaffirmed their commitment to an ambitious and inclusive global agreement to reduce gases, which should be concluded in Paris in 2015. The U.S. has also launched what is called the Clean Energy Ministerial, where a group of nations representing more than 3/4 of GHG emissions collaborate on deploying clean energy technologies. So engagement in energy is also about new technologies. The U.S. has also assembled what is called the Climate and Clean Air Coalition of nations that are working to achieve targeted reductions in what are called short-lived climate pollutants that account for over 30% of current global warming. And we are also working to harness the potential of innovative products and services. For example, within APEC, which I'll talk about a little bit later, we're working to eliminate non-tariff barriers to trade in the goods and services that will affect the area. So I've talked to you about major global trends, and I've talked to you about our national security, and I've mentioned what our economic engagement is. What I propose to do is to go a little bit in depth on certain areas of the world that are particularly important to us. I have much more information than I can share with you today, but it gives you an idea of what our engagement is in real terms. In Asia, as I mentioned, we're seeking to build a new economic architecture, not alone, but also with Europe. You can call it a pivot east, or you can call it a rebalancing. But we cannot ignore the fact that the world's wealth is shifting east. We work closely with APEC, which is the premier forum for economic cooperation in the Asia-Pacific. This collaboration focuses not just on tariffs, but it focuses on innovation. It focuses very much on the participation of women, and is increasingly working on what is called supply chain performance. Two other issues that are also part of our engagement with Asia, which you should be aware of, which is counterfeit pharmaceuticals, which exist in many parts of Asia, severely affecting populations, and trafficking in wildlife. Few people know that trafficking in wildlife is the third largest form of illegal trade in the world, right after arms and drugs. Specifically on China, 40 years ago, when President Nixon, and my former boss went with President Nixon, and he was only about 21, which was quite an opportunity. When President Nixon first visited China, we had absolutely no economic relationship with that country. Today, it is the key focus of our engagement east, though not exclusive. We have many, many high-level groups with them, and I've participated in many of them, including what is called the Strategic and Economic Dialogue. We have a forum on investment dialogue. We have an innovation dialogue. And that latter one is interesting because we're trying to channel China's huge hunger for innovation with our efforts to protect intellectual property. The government efforts are replicated within the NGO community, within the university community, within research communities, and within the private sector. 19% of our university students in the United States that come from other countries are from China. They are in absolutely every university of the United States and graduating at the top ranks. Another element about China that's important to know is that we want investment from China. We are open to investment from China, and as a result, Chinese investment in the United States doubled in 2013. Chinese-owned companies provided more than 70,000 jobs in the United States by the end of 2013. So you can see we have a very complex relationship on the economic side with China. India is another country to watch. India is a huge emerging economy. We have a number of strategic engagement dialogues with them. They have many names, but we cover investment, trade, innovation, and education. Another key element with India that also applies to China and others, it's not about the discussions at the government-to-government level. It's not just the non-state actors, but we go below and try to put together sub-national elements of the government to also engage. I'll move now to Europe. Europe still has half of the world's GDP and 1/3 of the world trade flows. Today, for a short while, the transatlantic economy is still the driver of the world economy. Why have we launched TTIP, which is the first significant agreement with Europe since the Marshall Plan? Because, firstly, Europe and the United States will be in a stronger position to meet the competitive challenges of Asia if we have stronger ties with one another and if we agree to the high common standards. Secondly, strengthened ties between the United States and the European Union will enhance our ability to build stronger relationships with emerging economies in Asia and other parts of the world. And a point that I think we need to focus on, and that few have brought out in this discussion of TTIP, for businesses in many emerging economies, the benefits of common US-EU standards resulting from TTIP could be considerable. Instead of manufacturing to conform to both EU and US standards, their production would only have to conform to one standard. So they have a stake in this discussion. Russia. As part of our global engagement policy, we are looking to increase our trade and investment with Russia. Over the past year, working groups established under what is called the US-Russia Bilateral Presidential Commission, which is a huge commission, have facilitated trade missions, made investments in energy programs, established science and technology partnerships, and work to harmonize standards to release the entrepreneurial potential of our both countries. And I note in the innovation dialogue we have with Russia, it is made up of nothing but private sector people. A few government people attend to preside over the meeting, but it's all run by the private sector. But I think it's very important to recognize that in this agenda with Russia, a country that still plays a huge role in the region, it's not about advancing our commercial agenda. All the elements that I mentioned before, including values, stand firm in our minds as we interchange with Russia. Standards have to be adhered to. And as a comment, it is also a country seeking to join the OECD. It would like to do so rapidly, but it needs to adhere the standards of that organization, to which Lithuania also aspires. We're also actively reaching out to other areas which I'll mention. The Western Hemisphere. This is a term we use for the area that stretches from Canada to the tip of South America. We have a huge economic relationship, and today, in the coming days, there's going to be the huge meeting of the North American presidents to discuss the North American side. We have what's called NAFTA, we have Central American Free Trade Agreements, we have FTAs with key countries such as Colombia. But our economic engagement is about much more. It is about reducing poverty in those countries that still have significant poverty. It is about providing opportunity. It is about promoting innovation entrepreneurship. And also it's about working with the key elements in the G20. I also note that key members of the Western Hemisphere are also part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we have launched a new Pacific alliance with many of the countries in the Western Hemisphere. They too are looking east. Africa. Africa is booming in nearly every sector, ranging from massive energy developments in Mozambique and Tanzania to countries I mentioned earlier. We also have major growth in Rwanda and Kenya, particularly in information and communications technology. And there is many a thriving industry in South Africa. In 2000, the economists referred to Africa as the hopeless continent. In 2011, they referred to Africa as the rising continent. Last March, it termed it the hopeful continent. We are deeply engaged in that region across a wide variety of initiatives and organizations. I'll also note that this is a region of deep importance to China, and we now have a dialogue with China on the future of Africa. The Middle East and North Africa, an area that is extremely important to Europe, even in its effects on Europe up here in the Baltics. Many would argue that the so-called Arab Spring was an economic awakening in a region full of young who did not have access to opportunity and who watched autocrats and elites take it all. As we've seen with the continued instability, unrest, and political uncertainty in parts of North Africa, much more work and engagement is needed to try to ensure that the promise of the Arab Spring is brought to fruition. Some of that work will be political, some will be operational, but much of the answer will be economic in nature. And I've attended many of the meetings where the young have been asking for opportunity. This is why our economic engagement in the region has been focused on providing opportunity, be it through massive infusions of funds to banks to lend to small and medium enterprises, to promoting entrepreneurship, to promoting the participation of women, and there are some formidable women in the region, and to changing regulatory environments. The process is likely to be long, but given the region's importance to both Europe and the United States, it must be an area of attention for all of us. In 2030, many of you will be in your late 30s or early 40s. I'm guessing at age groups here. Some of the professors will be a little older. I will definitely be older. The world, as I noted in discussing the trends coming from this report that I quoted, will have seen many changes. A shift of wealth, which I've repeatedly noted, away from the West. A huge increase in the middle class, and huge pressures on natural resources. We are trying to help shape and lead this world. We're engaging in new and different ways. We're trying to change a lot of the major institutions, including the IMF, and create more public-private partnerships. We're trying to establish new global norms for business and trade, spread values. We're encouraging inclusion, transparency, all the elements that I mentioned. In this effort, we most often partner with Europe, with countries like Lithuania, that is in every international institution. And in this effort, we have made economics a key component of US foreign policy. But as I noted, our engagement is not about a commercial policy, and I want to keep stressing that because I think there's misapprehension. And it is opportunity, poverty, fighting poverty, promoting values, setting standards, ensuring proper stewardship, inclusion of women, inclusion of marginal groups, protecting the environment, amongst other things. We and Europe share values and share many of these same objectives facing the future. Our leadership is expected in these complex times. The more we partner across the globe, the more we can shape our economic future and help others achieve more prosperous lives. I urge you all to participate in this venture. Thank you.